For millions of Americans, Social Security isn't just a supplemental income, it's their entire income. So the question is, can you survive on just Social Security, and not just survive, but actually thrive? I think you can, and I'm going to tell you how, but you got to be willing to make some changes. It's funny because I hear from people all the time that say, oh, no, it's not possible. You can't live on just Social Security alone. And the truth is, millions of people are doing it already. They have no choice. They literally have no choice. And they're making it work and they're doing fine. So I know it's possible, but is it desirable? I mean, it would be nice if everybody had, a cushy little savings or nest egg, but not everybody was able to do that. Or things happened and they depleted their savings. So now they are going to rely solely on Social Security. And they don't have a pension, they don't have IRAs or 401ks. They just have their monthly Social Security check. And like I said, it's doable if you're willing to make some cuts. Okay, the first thing you need to know is exactly how much will you be getting. In 2025, the average Social Security check is $1,900. Some people will get more, some people will get far less. The next thing you need to do is figure out what your monthly expenses are, make a budget. Inevitably, the biggest expense will be housing, whether you're renting or you own your own house. You still have, insurance, taxes, maintenance. So that'll be at the top of the list. Hopefully, it's no more than 30%. If it is, you might want to look into making some changes. And by changes, I mean you might consider downsizing, moving, um, getting a roommate. Some people have gone so far as to move out of bricks and sticks home and get an RV, and that's their home. They're going to travel, but at least they're not completely homeless. Next, you have to figure out a healthcare strategy because let's face it, as we get older, it's very important. You can apply for Medicare if you need extra help if you're low income. You can also look into Medicaid. Some states in some states, you can actually be dual eligible for Medicare and Medicaid. I preach about preventative health because I think it is so important because health expenses can be draining financially as we get older. If you're on prescription meds or, going to doctor's visits or any kind of medical equipment that you might require. So if it's possible, look into changes that might help. I was very sick just a few years ago and I had to make a lot of changes because I would not be able to afford to pay for our prescription meds or I was going in for weekly therapy and it wasn't covered by my insurance. So I had to make some changes. I changed my diet. I started exercising and it has helped tremendously, not just, my health, but my expenses. It's helped me tremendously financially. So the bottom line is preventative health care matters. So start now. Do what you need to do. If you need to change your diet, if you need to quit smoking or get off the couch, start moving. These things are going to make a difference, not just with your health, but your overall life, the quality of life. You know, your health is your wealth at this age. It's so important. Living on a tight budget doesn't mean giving up dignity or joy. There are things you can do to stretch your dollar. You can use senior discounts wherever you go. A lot of places offer senior discounts as young as 54. I found that out. Um, there's food assistant programs like SNAP. There's libraries. There's senior centers where you can tap into their internet if you can't afford it at home. You can cancel subscriptions you don't need. Most people do anymore. Very few people, stream, have Hulu and Netflix. I mean, have you seen how many they have? There are like literally 50 different things you can stream. And at one time, I probably had the majority of them. I wasn't even thinking, and it cost a fortune. So I cut back. I watch YouTube, and you can have premium YouTube, which costs a little more, or you can just use free YouTube, and that helps tremendously. Um, we actually had a landline for the longest time, and I don't know why, because we both use cell phones. But you can there's cheap cell phones that you can get that there's what Mint Mobile. I was going to look into that one. There's pay as you go if you don't use your phone a lot. Um, there's other things you can do. I've heard of people that gave up their vehicle. Now I can't do that because where I live, we don't have access to public transportation. It's like miles you'd have to walk just to get that, and plus I work. But at some point, if I was at the point where I couldn't do that anymore, I could no longer drive, or I couldn't afford my vehicle, I would consider moving to an area where everything is, in walking distance, easily accessible. And a lot of people do that. Or if you're married and you have two vehicles, maybe you can downsize to one. Especially if you're both not working, it would be easy to do. And that's a big expense. And we don't even think about it. But I've talked to a lot of people that have downsized to just one car, and it saves a ton of money. But if you're single and like I said, you don't have access to public transportation, then yeah, it's important to keep your vehicle, not just, so that you can go to doctor's appointments and things like that, but you don't want to give up your independence as we get older. And I've talked about that in other videos. Once you stop driving, it affects your independence. You rely on other people, and nobody wants to get to that point, but sometimes we have no choice. We just can't. We're not as sharp as we used to be. Our responses aren't, and we just don't feel comfortable driving anymore. But in the end, financially, it can be quite an expense, and one that you may not be able to afford. There are some programs, not as many as I thought there were, but there are some programs to help seniors, and I would encourage you to look into that. I mean, they're different from state to state to see what's available. There's even low-cost housing for seniors. They work on a sliding scale. If you want to stay in your own apartment or whatever. Like I said, a lot of people are moving out. They're moving into their vehicles, and the whole idea is to not have to do that. Some people are looking forward to it because they're going to be traveling, and they don't want to have to maintain a home anymore, because let's face it, it's a chore as we get older, not just financially, but physically, to keep up the maintenance on a home. So, I understand that. My biggest concern is once you give up your home and you do that, it could be difficult getting back into one if you had to. So, I would really think about that long and hard before you decide to do that. We have considered doing it for a period of time and possibly renting out our home while we travel, or turning it into an Airbnb, something like that. It's just a thought. We don't know for sure what we're going to do, but these are just options. Yeah, there's things you can do. You just have to look at your overall expenses, decide what's important to you for your quality of life. What can you afford? Housing should be your top priority. Um, it shouldn't be more than 30% of your income. If it can be less, that would be extremely helpful. Like I said, you can get a roommate. Not everybody wants to do that, but sometimes you don't have choices in these matters. If it's between being homeless and having to live with somebody, you do what you got to do. Um, as far as food programs, there are some help available. There's churches, there's food banks, there are some programs like SNAP. If you qualify, there is assistance. So look into those things. There's even help with utilities. These are things you need to look into ahead of time before you're going to be living only on Social Security. So if you want to make it work, you need to prepare and you need to make a budget. You need to know what you'll have coming in and what you'll have going out. And for some people, they can only cut their expenses so much. So my advice to them is consider doing some side work, gig work, like what I'm doing. I'm doing Uber. I do it, 4 nights a week, sometimes five. Sometimes I do the lunch hour, and it helps tremendously. And I think, like I said, it's not for everybody. It requires that you have a vehicle and that you're still driving. I see a lot of people my age and older doing it. As a matter of fact, I ran into one lady recently. She was almost 80. She does it every day. She actually enjoys it. So it's just something to consider. There's Uber, there's DoorDash, there's Instacart. There's a variety of different delivery services that you can do. Uber was the easiest to get into. They didn't have a waiting list, so that's why I recommend that one. As long as you have a reliable car and insurance, you're hired. But because of that, there are a lot more people doing it. So you may not get as much work as you would if you were doing DoorDash. The nice thing about California is we have Prop 22, which ensures that once you're on the clock, once you're working, you will at least make minimum wage while you're out there. So that's been very helpful. I also think it's very important to have community, a sense of community, because you never know when you're going to need some help, especially if you're single and you don't have a lot of family nearby. It's very important, whether it's a social thing, it's through your church. I just think it's very important to have people that you can call on if needed. And it's also good for you for interaction, like I said, for social things. I know people that belong to book clubs or crafting clubs, cards. They meet together once a week just to socialize and play games, that kind of thing. So I think that would help tremendously. Like I said, you want to not just survive, you want to thrive as you get older. And even though you may not have the money to live the lifestyle you had envisioned, it doesn't mean that your life has to be awful. It's what you make it. You have to have the right mindset, you have to have a good attitude, and you have to be willing to, make some changes. And I've seen so many people that are doing it and they're doing very well. I have one lady in town who she's in her 80s and she lives in subsidized apartments for seniors. And I think I've talked about her in past videos. She makes less than $1,000 a month on her Social Security, and I see her walking all over town. And she has a vehicle; it's paid for, but she doesn't, want to use the gas, and I get that. So she walks. She lives in town more, so it's easy for her to get to stores and whatnot. And it's good for her health, and it's good for her socially because she talks to people when she's out and about. And she also does DoorDash. She goes out and she does DoorDash, so she does make some money over and above her Social Security. But if you were to tell people that she was surviving on less than 1,000, they wouldn't believe you. They just can't even fathom that that's possible. And like I said, it is difficult because if anything should arise, you don't have a buffer. That's scary. It's scary to be in that situation. But I'm not here to preach to you and tell you, you should have done this or you should have done that. If you are at that point, there's no turning back the clock. This is where you're at. You are at the point where you're relying solely on Social Security and you're trying to figure out how to make it work. I just want you to know that it is possible, but it's not the most desirable, but it can be done. And you just have to be willing to make some changes. You may not live the lifestyle that you have always lived or that you had envisioned. And that's just, that's just the way it is. So let me know if you have any tips or tricks for stretching your dollar, for making things work. I know a lot of us are pretty frugal. We grew up with that, our parents were, and we've just learned to adapt, So yeah, I'm always open to hearing from other people that are making it work and have some great tips to share. So yeah, leave me a comment. Let me know if that's you. And thanks for listening, and I will see you in the next video.